this special tribute a celebration of the life of our friend and teammate, Luc Bourdon.
Every May 29th, Canucks fans post about a defenseman who played 36 games. Not because he was a legend, but because he was supposed to become one. Luc Bourdon came out of a fishing town nobody had heard of, got drafted 10th overall, and was finally starting to look like the answer. A motorcycle ride home ended all of it. He was born on February 16, 1987, the only child of a woman named Suzanne Boucher, in a town where the fishing boats outnumbered the career options and the language on every sign was French. Shipygon had produced exactly one NHL draft pick before Luc Bourdon arrived. A goaltender named Yannick DeGrasse, who the Philadelphia Flyers took in the 5th round in 1991, and who died in a vehicle accident 10 years later. That's the kind of history a town carries without advertising it. And Bourdon would have known it in the way you know anything in a place with fewer than 3,000 people and no secrets. At 9 years old, juvenile arthritis put him in a wheelchair, and the doctors who treated him were not optimistic about competitive hockey or competitive anything. The disease attacks your joints, and when you're a child who already plays the game, the joints are the entire conversation. He came back from it, which people later talked about as though it were an early preview of the player he would become. But at the time, it was just a kid in a small town refusing to accept what he had been told about what his body could do. He was a straight A student at Marie Esther Secondary, which nobody brings up in draft profiles because draft profiles don't care about report cards. But which matters when you're trying to understand the whole person and not just the skater. He spent his summers on his uncle's crab fishing boat, doing the kind of physical labor that Shipygon expects of its young men, regardless of what else they might be good at. And when he signed his first professional contract years later, he took $10,000 of the money and donated it anonymously to the local minor hockey association, specifically earmarked for families who couldn't afford equipment. His old bantam coach, a man named Gilles Cormier, only revealed this after Bourdon was dead. Nobody in the town knew about the donation while he was alive, because he never told anyone. And that single fact tells you more about him than any scouting report ever could. The QMJHL took him 3rd overall in the 2003 draft, and at 16 years old, he left Shipygon to play for the Val-d'Or Fureurs, billeted with a family he had never met, in a city that spoke his language, but wasn't his home. He played there, then moved to the Moncton Wildcats, and by the time the 2006 World Junior Championship arrived in British Columbia, he was playing in his own country for the first time on a stage this big. And he was ready to show everyone what the scouts had been whispering about for 2 years. He led all defensemen in scoring at that tournament with 6 points in 6 games and was named to the All-Star team, and this was not a weak field. This was the tournament where Evgeny Malkin won the MVP award, where the rosters were loaded with first-round talent, and where Bourdon played with the calm of someone who had already decided he belonged. Canada won gold, and Bourdon went home to Shipygon and showed the medal to crowds at the local arena. Because that's what you do when your town has never had a moment like this before. A year later, at the 2007 World Juniors in Sweden, he scored the game-tying goal in the 3rd period of the semifinal against the United States. Canada won in a shootout and went on to win a 2nd consecutive gold medal, and Bourdon came home with 2 of them around his neck before his 21st birthday. By June 2005, NHL Central Scouting had ranked him the 6th best North American skater available for the draft. The Canucks took him 10th overall. The very next pick, number 11, went to the Los Angeles Kings, who used it on a Slovenian center named Anze Kopitar. Kopitar was an immediate difference maker in Los Angeles. Bourdon was not. That gap, 1 spot apart on the draft board, followed him everywhere. Training camp in the fall of 2005 was the first time the Canucks organization got a real look at what they had drafted. And the reaction was not subtle. Bourdon, 18 years old, nearly made the opening night roster. The coaching staff was astounded by his poise, his skating, and the physical maturity of a teenager playing against grown men. Steve Tambellini, the assistant general manager, later said Bourdon had blown the coaches away with his poise and strength. And the word circulating throughout the organization was that this kid was going to be the real thing. He signed a 3-year entry-level deal worth $850,000 per season on May 4th, 2006. And from that moment forward, the pressure did not let up. The problem with astounding people at 18 is that you set a standard before you have the tools to sustain it. And the Canucks, whether they realized it or not, had created expectations they were not equipped to manage. They drafted a defenseman, told him he was the future, and then spent the next 2 years sending him down every time he didn't look like the future fast enough. In the 2006-07 season, Bourdon played for 5 different teams. Listen to that number again, because it matters. 5. The Vancouver Canucks, the Moncton Wildcats in the QMJHL, the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles in the QMJHL, the Manitoba Moose in the AHL, and Team Canada at the World Juniors. That is not a development path. That's a young player being moved around like a piece on a board by people who couldn't agree on where he should be or what he needed. A fractured fibula he had suffered during his final junior season with Moncton, before he had even turned professional, was still affecting him. Doctors had told him the injury would take 2 years to fully heal. And while he managed to return in half that time, the damage lingered in his turning ability and his backward skating, which are not minor details when your entire value proposition is that you're a two-way defenseman who can skate at an elite level. The expectation weight set by that first training camp, the one where coaches could not stop talking about him, became a trap that closed slowly and then all at once. Former GM Dave Nonis, who had been replaced by Mike Gillis by the time Bourdon died, said it plainly on Vancouver radio. The first couple of years with us, he felt a lot of the pressure of being a high pick. That sentence, delivered after the fact, was the closest the organization ever came to acknowledging that the system had failed him before the highway did. Then the 2007-08 season arrived, and something shifted. Bourdon started settling into the professional game the way people who knew him always believed he would. He played 27 NHL games that year, the most of his career, alongside 41 games with the Moose, and the quality of his play had changed in a way that was visible to anyone watching. He scored his first NHL goal on November 16, 2007 against goaltender Nicklas Backstrom in a 6-2 win over the Minnesota Wild. And from that point forward, the conversation around him was no longer about whether he would become an NHL regular, but about when. He was regularly mentioned in trade speculation, most significantly as part of a rumored package for Tampa Bay Lightning forward Brad Richards. And you don't get included in those conversations unless the other team sees value worth acquiring. That is the measure of what Bourdon had become by the spring of 2008. A player whose name carried weight in front offices that had nothing to do with Vancouver. His agent, Kent Hughes, who had first met Bourdon when he was 15 years old, said it simply: there was no quit in him. Corey Schneider, the goaltender who had been his teammate with the Manitoba Moose, described a player who worked hard but always kept it light, who would finish practice and then start some ridiculous game or drill just to make people laugh. And Steve Tambellini, the assistant GM who had watched him grow from a teenager at camp into something approaching a finished product, said, "You could sense when you got to know Luc that when he emerged as an NHL regular, he would be an impact player." All of those quotes are in the present tense. All of them became past tense in May 2008. Stop here, because everything that comes next is going to feel different from what just came before it. Bourdon had purchased a Suzuki GSX R1000 about 3 weeks before the crash. His motorcycle license was 2 weeks old. On the afternoon of May 29th, he was riding a road between Shippagan and Lamech, heading back toward his hometown, and his girlfriend Charlene Ward was following behind him in her car. Environment Canada recorded winds gusting between 50 to 70 kilometers an hour in the area that day. At some point on that stretch of road, Bourdon lost control of the motorcycle, crossed the center line, and struck an oncoming tractor-trailer head-on. He was 21 years old. He died instantly. Charlene watched it happen. The RCMP stated afterward that reckless driving was not considered a factor in the crash, and that his inexperience with motorcycles may have contributed. In the aftermath, Canucks GM Mike Gillis was asked whether the organization had any policies in place prohibiting players from engaging in dangerous recreational activities. He didn't have an answer. What he said was that they were most definitely going to have policies or educational programs going forward, which is the kind of sentence that sounds responsible until you realize it's an admission that nothing existed before. The organization that had shuffled Bourdon between 5 teams in a single season, that had loaded an 18-year-old with franchise-level expectations, and then punished him for not meeting them immediately, had no framework for protecting its players off the ice either. That is not an accusation aimed specifically at the Canucks, because the truth is that almost no NHL team had those frameworks in 2008. The league's relationship with player welfare has always been reactive, responding to tragedies rather than preventing them, and that pattern did not start with Bourdon, and it did not end with him. The Canucks' public response after Bourdon's death was genuine in its grief and entirely incomplete in its accountability. But that is not a criticism unique to Vancouver. That's the league standard, and it's been the league standard for decades. Teams mourn publicly and audit privately, and the changes, when they come at all, arrive quietly enough that nobody has to admit the old way was wrong. What the Canucks did with the grief is worth telling properly, because they didn't let it fade. They wore LB on their helmets for the entire 2008-09 season. At the home opener against the Calgary Flames, the organization held a ceremony in which Tom Cochrane and Red Ryder performed Big League, a song written from the perspective of a father whose hockey-playing son was killed when a truck crossed into his lane on a highway. They presented Bourdon's last game-worn jersey to his mother, Suzanne. She had already draped it over his coffin at his memorial in Shippagan, where more than 2,000 mourners had gathered in the Real Cormier Center to say goodbye. Alex Burrows, who had been Bourdon's closest friend on the team, remained close to Charlene Ward after the crash, along with his partner at the time. And when Burrows scored the overtime goal that eliminated the St. Louis Blues from the 2009 playoffs, he mimed drawing a bow, pulling back an imaginary arrow, and shot it at the sky. That was Luc's celebration, a gesture Bourdon had used after scoring during his junior career, and Burrows kept bringing it back after the biggest goals of his life, because grief that's real doesn't stop expressing itself when the cameras turn off. The NHLPA raised $115,000 in Bourdon's honor, and the proceeds went toward establishing the Luc Bourdon Memorial Fund, supporting scholarships and youth initiatives in his community. Fans in Vancouver raised more than $12,000 for Canuck Place, the children's hospice, through an online campaign that encouraged donations of $28, Bourdon's jersey number. In December of 2012, the town of Shippagan erected a statue of him outside the arena where he had once shown his gold medals to the crowd. The next time a young defenseman gets shuffled through 4 cities in 6 months, it's worth asking what exactly we're watching. Whether that's developments or an organization managing an asset rather than caring for a person. Luc Bourdon was both of those things. An asset and a person. And the system saw the asset clearly, while his teammates saw the person. The question that lingers, the reason Canucks fans still post about him every May 29th, is which version of him we choose to remember. Luc Bourdon never played a full NHL season. He played 36 games total across 2 years, split with the Moose, called up when someone got hurt, and sent back down when they didn't. That is an incomplete sentence. It will always be incomplete. If you want early access to videos like this one before they go public, the Healthy Scratch membership is how you do that. Link below. Everything else you need is in the description. The next video is already in production. Subscribe so you don't miss it.